Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May branch meeting. My name is Julia Clark, and I am the president of the ASCE Houston branch. At this time, I ask Ms. Alexa Nichols to lead us in pledges and invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. And if you would please bow your heads. Dear Lord, we are grateful for the ability to gather via technology during this time of social distancing. As always, we ask that you grace our leaders around the world with wisdom and guidance. We also ask that you guide all of us to do the work you've entrusted to us as engineers, leaders, parents, siblings, children, and servants. Amen.
Thank you, Alexa. I would like to recognize the following ASCE Houston branch sponsors. These sponsors are vital for supporting a bulk of the branch operations, which include our monthly branch meetings, our K through 12 STEM activities, and our scholarship program. Our platinum sponsors are ADS, Ameritech, BGE, Contech, ECS Southwest, EHRA, Fugro, HAF, LAN, McDonough, PGAL, Rabba Kistner, Terracon, TNP, and Walter P. Moore. Our gold sponsors are Aguirre and Fields, Cobb Fenley, HR Green, and RPS. Our silver sponsors are Dannenbaum, Nino and Moore, and T. Baker Smith. The following are the announcements. The ASCE Global Elections is now open, and the positions on the ballot are 2021 President-elect, Society Director, and Region Governors. Also, amendments to the Society's constitutions are on the ballot. ASCE members can cast their ballot by visiting www.asce.org. The board of the ASCE Houston branch recently approved the 2020-2021 proposed slate of officers for the organization's upcoming election. Our election will begin in late May and will conclude in June. The proposed slate of officers is as follows. President-elect Masa Arasu. Vice President Administration Uttam Carmaker. Vice President Communications Anna Tice. Vice President Education Alexa Nichols. Vice President Technical Michael Bloom. Treasurer-elect Johnny Kim. Branch Director Tim Smelser. Secretary Aaron Orozco. And Section Director Luis Gonzalez. The progressive positions are past President Julia Clark, President Sarah Alvarez, and Treasurer Connor McBride. At this time, I call on Manik Metra to give brief announcements on behalf of our local ASCE institutes and to introduce our keynote speaker. Manik?
Thank you, Julia. There are like a couple of activities going on in our institute chapter. ACI, they have their technical session is going to be online, and the topic is case studies in computer vision based structure inspection and monitoring. It will be on Tuesday, May 26th at noon. And then EWRI, they have another technical session. It's going to be online as well. Harris County Flood Control District tunneling presentation. Topic is digging deep for flood relief in Harris County. It will be on Wednesday, May 27th at noon. Now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Richard Long. Mr. Richard Long currently serves as a natural resource management specialist for the Houston Project Office of Galveston District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In this position, he is responsible for providing guidance to and overseeing the Natural Resource Management Program for Houston Project Office. He also serves on the PDT for Addicks and Barker Dam Safety Study and the Buffalo Bayou and Tributary Resiliency Study. Mr. Long has worked for Corps of Engineers for 42 years, 39 of which have been with Galveston District. Prior to his current position, Mr. Long has served as a park ranger at Addicks Project Office, park manager at Addicks Project Office, and natural resource manager for Houston Project, which oversees the operation and maintenance of Addicks and Barker Dams and Reservoir and Willisville Lake Project. A 1980 graduate of Arkansas Tech University, Mr. Long received a Bachelor of Science degree in Park and Recreation Administration. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Richard Long for his presentation. And before Mr. Long start, there are like some key points I would like to point it out. If you see on the screen right now, you can find out your handout in the handout section right there. You can download it, and if you have any question, you can type your question in there, and there's a drop down menu. Which person you want to send to, you can directly send to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Manik. Just one moment.
Okay, good morning. I guess it's my turn now. I'm Richard Long. I am with the Army Corps of Engineers, as Manik pointed out. I am in self-quarantine right now with my grandchildren and their mother, who came over from Okinawa 2 Saturdays ago. My son's in the Air Force, and he's in the process of transitioning back to the States, so I'm enjoying time with my grandchildren at this time. And so if you see me put my hand up to my lips and do something like that, I'm telling them to be quiet on the other side of the door over here. Because as y'all well know, grandchildren like attention, and I like giving it to them also. This presentation I'm going to give you today is, the slide deck is one that we've used for high school kids all the way up to congressmen and 3-star generals. And we've modified it as time has gone on and for the group that we're giving it to. So this is what we call Addicks and Barker 101. And we're going to go through the history of Addicks and Barker, what's going on out at the projects now, how they operate, and the future of this. Many of you may have seen this before. I know there's some of you out there who I've worked very closely with over the years on projects in and around the reservoirs, other drainage issues in Harris County, and there are probably some of my ex-bosses out there also. So I'm glad to be able to do this, and this is the first doing one virtually for me. If we can go to the first slide, please.
Richard, can you click on to see if you can go to the next slide?
That's right. Okay. Let's see how fast this will work here. Okay, it went to the first one, then went away. I've got to have some patience because it's sluggish, it looks like.
I can operate it for you if you don't mind.
Okay, hang on just a second. I think I figured it out.
There we go.
Okay. Let's talk about where Addicks and Barker is first. You have downtown Houston there, and then you have these two large green areas out on the west side of Houston in West Harris County, Addicks and Barker Dam and Reservoir and Barker Dam and Reservoir. The yellow star is where our office is, and also where the water control structure for Barker Dam. The blue star is in the Piney Point Village area, and that's where we monitor our flows and our releases from Addicks and Barker at a USGS stream gauge located on a bridge there across Buffalo Bayou. A little different look at the layout of the project and its relationship to Houston. When we talk about Addicks and Barker and Buffalo Bayou, we're always talking about their watersheds because that's where we get the rainfall that's collected behind the dams and it runs on down Buffalo Bayou. Harris County Harris County Flood Control has also divided the county into various watersheds for their management purposes, 22 watersheds. And today we're going to be talking about Buffalo Bayou watershed, and that is the area of Buffalo Bayou downstream of Addicks and Barker dams. The Addicks watershed, that area that is in the watershed for Addicks Reservoir, and then the Barker watershed. The dams are such unique structures that Harris County has taken the Buffalo Bayou watershed and divided it into three unique watersheds. Both Addicks and Barker watershed combined is a little over 260 square miles. So they're not a real large drainage area, but they are highly populated, and that population is growing rapidly on a day-to-day basis. Why are we here? Back in 1929 and 1935, Harris County experienced some floods, and Houston experienced some floods that resulted in quite a few deaths, second-story water in downtown Houston, and siltation of the Houston Ship Channel that caused the ship channel to be closed for 6 months. And so Harris County and the community looked and said, we need help to find a solution to our flooding problems in Houston. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers, which actually is a branch of the U.S. Army, it's the construction branch of the Army, and my boss quite a few levels up is actually a colonel, and the Corps of Engineers chief is actually a 3-star general located in the Pentagon. We don't go looking for projects to do, infrastructure projects to do, but we are out there to serve the community in navigation, flood risk management, water supply, hydropower, recreation, and environmental stewardship. When a project is needed, the local community goes to their elected official, and their elected official goes to the Corps and says, see what kind of help you can provide the community. Through this relationship with the community and through our elected officials, we will hopefully come up with a project that will look at the issues that need to be addressed. In this situation for the flooding in Houston, our partner was Harris County Flood Control District. And Harris County Flood Control District was initially formed to be our partner back in the 30s following these floods. The original Buffalo Bayou and Tributary Flood Control Project, and if you see legal documents concerning Addicks and Barker, they're generally going to say Buffalo Bayou and Tributary Flood Control Project, which Addicks and Barker are a part of. Basically involved 3 different watersheds. It involved the White Oak Bayou watershed, the Buffalo Bayou watershed, and the Braves Bayou watershed. You can see the elements on there of this original plan. We're going to talk about White Oak Bayou first off, and you can see a reservoir actually on White Oak Bayou. and a south canal and a north canal coming out of those that reservoir. We're gonna end that discussion here real quick because White Oak Bio does not play much into our operations today. The reservoir was never built on White Oak Bio. Instead, White Oak Bio was channelized and hardened with concrete over much of its route to provide the flood risk management necessary to meet the needs of the community. Braised Bio was going to be picked up by the South Canal, and also Buffalo Bio was going to be picked up by the South Canal. That South Canal is basically located where Beltway 8 is now, Sam Houston Tollway, and it was going to carry flows from Buffalo Bio all the way, crossing Braised Bio, and all the way to Galveston Bay. That South Canal was not built. We're going to get in a little bit more of that discussion in a minute. Also, you see a Cypress Creek levee. It was also not built. Cypress Creek lies north of the Addicks watershed, and in a 1% flood, you have overflow that will actually overflow the watershed divide from Cypress Creek into the Addicks Reservoir watershed. In a 1% event or a 100-year flood, it is estimated that about 20,000 acre-feet of water will jump that divide. During Harvey, the numbers were estimated numbers were in excess of 40,000 acre-feet of water. Some numbers go up as high as 60,000 acre-feet of water. That's a considerable amount of water. So let's jump on down to Addicks and Barker. You see the two reservoirs there. They were constructed. And you also see an improved channel along Buffalo Bio down to Westbelt, where Westbelt is today. That was also constructed. But one unique aspect of the project was that there were no gates on the reservoirs other than on the middle conduit. The left image that you're seeing shows a gate tower with only 2 gates on it, and that's on the middle conduit or the middle pipe that carries water. In the right 2 conduits that you're looking at there, those white squares are actually daylight all the way through the conduits looking downstream. So you're looking at the upstream end of the Barker water control structure as it was originally built back in the 40s. Construction started on Barker Dam in 43, was finished in 45. Construction started on Addicks Dam in 45 and was finished in 48. You can see an uncontrolled release coming out of Barker Dam. That bridge that you see just downstream is the Highway 6 bridge across Buffalo Bio, just downstream of Barker Dam. And the goal was, at that time, was to have these reservoirs act more like detention basins do today, with the size of the conduits being the controlling factor that would control the release of water out of the reservoirs. And then that water would go down that improved channel to where Westbelt is today and get into that diversion channel and go all the way to Galveston Bay. Well, the diversion channel was not built. So we had to punt. And so, well, over time, we saw Houston grow and continue to grow. You can see an image of Houston back in the 50s, that yellow area on an old map. And then you can see where in the early 90s, Houston had grown out to the dams and was starting to develop around the dams. And then in 2016, you can see where the development has actually gone all the way around the reservoirs, and the watersheds continue to develop. As this all occurred, we saw we were not going to be able to build a South Diversion Canal. Our new plan back in the 40s still was to gate 2 of the uncontrolled conduits and channelize Buffalo Bio all the way downstream. And the image you're seeing here is where we're gating 2 of the 4 uncontrolled conduits at Barker. Excuse me, this one's at Addicks, and we did the same thing at Barker, with that plan to channelize Buffalo Bio. Well, the environmental movement was starting in the early 60s. And while we had plans to do that, those plans were shelved with the environmental movement and with congressional action that decided instead of channelizing Buffalo Bio, we would protect Buffalo Bio. So we came back and we gated the other two conduits. And so now where we used to have 4 conduits ungated that had uncontrolled release from the reservoirs in excess of 15,000 cubic feet per second, now we had total control of the releases, and we set our safe release at 6,000 cubic feet per second. So we reduced our releases by 2.5 times. Okay. Then in the early 70s, the community came to us and said, this is still too much water going down Buffalo Bio. You can imagine Houston being developed and continuing to develop over that time. And they asked us to reduce our releases further. And so we reduced our releases, or what we consider our safe releases, down to 2,000 cubic feet per second. And that's as it passes the Piney Point gauge. Okay, we saw that Piney Point gauge in one of the earlier slides, located about halfway between downtown and the project. So we went from an uncontrolled release of 15,000 cubic feet per second to a controlled release of only 2,000 cubic feet per second. Now, when I say that uncontrolled release, you got to realize that whatever was in the bio from Mother Nature was added to that. The rain event we saw the other day produced over 3,000 cubic feet per second at the Piney Point gauge with our dam closed. So that means we would have had in excess of 18,000 cubic feet per second down there. So you can see what would happen there. So with 2,000 cubic feet per second, we could not even release through the storm, and we had to wait till the storm passed and the water receded in the bio before we could start releasing at that time. So we've had a lot of changes in the area. We just covered basically 40 years of history of the project. And what has happened over time, we deleted the South Canal, we deleted the Cypress Creek levee, and we gated the structures. Downstream, we've had increased development and decreased releases. Upstream, we've had increased development, increased runoff, more rapid runoff. What has the result of all this been? More frequent pools, faster rising pools, larger pools, and longer lasting pools. These images here show the top 10 pools at Addicks and Barker over the history of the project. We're going to look at this real briefly right here, but what I'd like to point out to you is that on the Addicks list of the top 10 pools, only one of them occurred before 1992. All other 9 of them occurred after 1992. And in Barker Reservoir, all of them occurred after 1992. So you can see the impact that the changes to the project and the development around the projects and then the watershed is having on our operations. In addition, I want you to look at when these storms occurred, which month of the year. We often get questions, when's our rainy season? And everybody thinks it could be hurricane season. Well, if you look at that, you have storms all over the calendar, and only a few of them are actually tropical events. So we can't say we have a wet season and a dry season here in Houston. I'm sure contractors would love it if we could actually pinpoint that so they could plan their work accordingly. How do we actually work within the system to manage waters in the reservoirs and going on downstream? We have a system of rain gauges throughout Harris County that's operated by Harris County Flood Risk Management System. And we have a gauging system all over the county and along Buffalo Bio. We're also watching rain gauges, real-time activity at rain gauges. We're also watching radar, and we're also looking at weather predictions. All these items we are rolling together to determine how to best operate our projects out here, Addicks and Barker Reservoir. We're going to look at here at a event that occurred back in February of 2019, just as an example. So today, the reservoirs, I'm going to use this past weekend as an example. Today, the reservoirs are empty. On Friday, the reservoirs were empty. Friday morning, the reservoirs were empty. We were passing the flows of Buffalo Bayou through Barker Reservoir and on through Barker Dam. We had a prediction of 2 to 4 inches of rain. So while we normally do not do a preemptive closure of the dams when a rain event is coming, depending on what time that rain event may occur and the severity of the rain event, we may do a preemptive closure. This rain event was supposed to come in the very early morning hours. And as we all know in Houston, it can be very difficult to get around Houston when it's raining hard. So we decided to do a preemptive closure, which was very good that we did that, because right behind that closure, we had that storm come in Friday evening, which was not supposed to happen, but dumped over 2 inches of rain on it. And that caused the bayou to go up to 3,200 cubic feet per second. Again, none of that was our water. That was Mother Nature's water that fell below the dam, and we could not do anything with that. Once we closed the dam, we left the dam closed until we saw that the bayou was going to recede. We would open the dam back up again. Once the weather cleared, we would discharge water until the reservoirs were empty again. And that's what we did over the weekend. Once the bad weather passed, in the early morning hours on Saturday, we were able to start our releases, watching the gauges at Piney Point to regulate our releases, and we were able to empty reservoirs in a few days. Depending on the event, it may take days, weeks, or even months to empty the reservoirs. And we've seen that in various pools and over history at the projects. What you can see here, this image is where we had a rain on February 21st, and you can see the reservoir jumped up on the graph on the right, and the reservoir fell back down. Then a few days later, we had some rain events, and you can see how those reacted in Buffalo Bayou. And then once the weather cleared, we began releasing up to 2,000 cubic feet per second, maintained that release, and then the reservoirs emptied out, and the bayou, as you can see in the graph, fell back down to a normal flow. So we've talked about what's happened over the years. We've had 3 big flood events in the very recent history at Addicks and Barker in the Houston area. We had the Memorial Day flood back on Memorial 2015, the Tax Day flood in April 2016, and then, of course, we had Harvey in August 2017. At the time Tax Day occurred, now Tax Day was a one-day event, and we had about 16 inches of rain in an 8-hour period centered over the Addicks watershed. We saw the fastest rising pool in the history of the projects. We saw damaging and flooding inflows, and all major roads in both Addicks and Barker reservoirs were flooded for numerous weeks. Following that, a year later, was Hurricane Harvey. Normally when I begin my presentations, I will ask the audience for a show of hands. Can't do that today, but I will ask how many people were directly impacted by Harvey, how many of those people were impacted by the operations of Addicks and Barker Reservoir, and how many people in the audience are actually lawyers. Depending on my answer, I get the opportunity to say, thank y'all, I'm out of here. Too many people were impacted. So with that being said, Department of Justice is controlling our verbiage and our tongues a little bit. So when we get into the question and answer session, if I do not answer a question completely, That may be because we're still in the litigation process of the activities that occurred around Harvey, and we're a little limited in what we can say. So I apologize for that right now. By the way, I have never walked out of any presentation. I was just kidding when I said that. So we knew Harvey was going to be first off a North Mexico storm, then a South Texas storm, and it just kept moving up the coast, and then it decided to make landfall. And making landfall is one thing, but of course with Harvey, what happened was there were not enough steering currents in the atmosphere, and Harvey stalled. For 3 days, it dumped water over us. And you can see some of those rainfall totals as the forecast changed and what happened there. We know that actually Beaumont and the Port Arthur area got hit harder than we did by rainfall. And of course, the area down the coast where the hurricane made landfall got a whole lot more damage than we did from the hurricane force winds and the storm surge. But Houston's big, so we got all the press out of it. Looking at the rain gauge system there, you can see, and I know it's a little hard to see what you may be looking at, but we saw some rain gauges in Harris County in the 50-inch range over that 3-day period. We generally had 30 to 35 inches of rain over the Addicks and Barker watershed. You're looking at an image, in the center image is the Addicks water control structure, Addicks Peak, during Harvey. You can see the water control structure is almost inundated, and in fact, the water got so deep out there that we had to cut commercial power, and we ended up operating the structure using a large drill and portable generator because we were unsure about our power source leading out to the structure and what impact it may have had. If you look at the image on the right, that is the structure as it used to look, as it would have looked about 3 months ago. And I'll get to that in just a minute also. So you can see the dramatic difference in the two water levels that we had. Harvey was not a worst case scenario, however. You're looking at Addicks Reservoir there. The red line on the east and south are basically where the dam is located. The red line on the north and west is our property line. The black line was the extent of the pool created by Harvey. So we did not own enough real estate to store the water that was generated by Harvey within the government property limits. That's what resulted in the flooding upstream of the reservoirs on areas adjacent to government property. You see blue areas reaching out beyond the black line. That is a worst case scenario. You see there is a whole lot more area that could have been impacted if Harvey would have continued to occur and if we would have not made our emergency surge releases from the reservoir. We've got the same thing at Barker with the dam, the red line being the back property line, basically at 95 feet NGVD. The black line being the pool elevation from Harvey, and then an additional blue area beyond the black line that would be a worst case scenario for the reservoirs. You're looking at the two graphs here. You're looking at precipitation on the lower left hand. On the upper left hand, you're looking at the rate of precipitation, and you're looking at Barker Reservoir on the top right in feet, and you're looking at Barker Reservoir in acre feet on the lower right. What we wanted to point out here was you can see where it actually rained harder during tax day flood initially, and then it stopped raining. And you can see the rapid rise in the reservoir from the tax day flood in red. compared to Harvey. But with the additional rainfall, we had a much larger pool. The reason we stacked these two graphs next to each other on elevation and storage is so that the public will understand that while the elevation is impacted by the shape of the reservoir, the storage is not. So we have a very large funnel out in the reservoir. So when it initially starts filling, the reservoirs will rise very rapidly, and then that rise will flatten out as the pool gets outside of all the channels and starts spreading out through the reservoir area. But the rate of rise in acre feet, the storage, will stay reasonably constant, as you can see in the lower graph, until the rainfall events stop and the inflows stop, and we begin our releases from the reservoir. We're back to this table again right here that talks about Addicks and Barker and the top 10 pools. Let's look at Barker here for a minute, Addicks here for a minute, because it's the easiest to talk about these changes in pool elevations. Again, we measure our pools in acre feet. And if you'll start at basically the number 10 pool, the highest pool the number 10th highest pool in history, you'll see we had 44,000 acre feet in that pool that we had to manage. And over time, you can see those pools increase by 5,000 acre feet, 1,000 acre feet, a couple of thousand acre feet, on up to 1992, the third highest pool of record that occurred in March of that year. And you can see we had 65,000 acre feet of water in the reservoir. That was our pool of record for many, many, many years. Then tax day came. You can see we went from 65,000 acre feet to 123,000 acre feet. Our storage doubled in one storm event, and that was a one-day storm event on top of that. Then 1 year later, we almost doubled again with Harvey when we went to 217,000 acre feet of water. Those are dramatic increases that we saw, that while over the previous history they were slow increases in those pools, these were very dramatic. These are being caused by those changes in the project and climate change also. While there's a lot of people who say, question whether climate change is real or not, you'll always hear me say climate change is real. Climate change has always been occurring, and climate change will continue to occur, whether it's man-made, Mother Nature, the natural process of things, however you want to look at it. But it's obvious that climate change is occurring, and that is having impacts on our projects and on our operations. Okay, in our communication process and dealing with these flood events, we've established an organization called the Addicks and Barker Emergency Coordination Team, ABEC. This is made up of Harris County, Fort Bend County, the City of Houston, TxDOT, Department of Public Safety, USGS, the National Weather Service, and us. And this allows us to communicate what is going on with the reservoirs. And we come together on a very regular basis to discuss our membership and what's going on with the project. And we also have exercises, both tabletop exercises and virtual exercises, so that we know that we have our communication system down when one of these rain events occur. We're familiar with each other. Most of us have been in this organization for a while. Our water management team out of our Galveston district office is actually in charge of the coordination team, and we use this every time we have a decent pool. Okay, what's going on at Addicks and Barker right now? If many people have heard about the dam safety issues we have at Addicks and Barker, We got a little sluggish here. Let's see what's going to happen. Okay, our dam safety issues. Back in 2007, we had a review of Addicks and Barker Dam by the Corps, and this took place nationwide at all Corps projects across the nation. This came about as a result of Hurricane Katrina, when we saw issues with some of our projects there. This review looked at the dams, their construction, their operations, and the material that the dams were built on. Well, these dams were built back in the 40s, and they had gone through a long history. The dams were rated on a dam safety action classification from a scale of 1 to 5. And that scale, 1 was the highest risk, and 5 was normal. Addicks and Barker, I always add this in there with tongue in cheek. I am proud to say Addicks and Barker got a score of DSAC 1. And when I say like that, I say it tongue in cheek. Now, Washington, D.C. made our life tough right about that time at headquarters when they defined DSAC 1 dams. And if you can look at the characteristics there, it says critically near failure. Of course, that's what the press picked up on with the critically near failure. But if you look on down in that definition, it says, or extreme incrementally high risk of failure. That's what we have. When we looked at our dam, we found 2 areas of concern. Seepage around our water control structures and the conduits that drain the reservoirs, and the question of whether our emergency spillways located at each end of each dam would stand up if they were ever engaged or water ever ran over the top of them. We felt that it was critical enough to address the conduit issues and the seepage around the conduit where we addressed that issue first. In order to address that issue, we evaluated the structures very closely. And the first thing we did was install some interim risk reduction measures while we were studying the problem, while we were determining what the best answer to solve the problem was, and while we constructed the fix for the problem. So these interim risk reduction measures are called ERMs. That's the Army uses acronyms all the time. So we grouted our conduits where we thought we may have some voids. We improved our gate operations. We installed generators on site, and we did various other elements, about $10 million in total, so that we knew that these structures would last over that time period while we were doing the repairs to the structures for a final fix. And the final fix was to replace the water control structures. So we were going to build brand new water control structures at both Addicks and Barker. We awarded a contract in August of 2015. Notice that this occurred before tax day. This construction that we have going on right now had nothing to do with the tax day flood, had nothing to do with Harvey, and no changes were made in the design post-tax day or post-Harvey. The original cost of the contract was just shy of $72 million. We're a little over $75 million right now. This contract was originally scheduled to be completed last summer, but tax day and Harvey did slow the construction down, and some other rain events. And so we're looking right now at this summer construction being completed on these new water control structures. The contract calls for three major elements: a new water control structure at Barker, a new water control structure at Addicks, and some cutoff walls installed in the dam at Barker in the vicinity of Highway 6 and Briar Forest, where we had some potential seepage paths under the dam. How are we going to do this and still have the reservoirs operate throughout the storm event. You're looking at the layout of Barker Reservoir and Dam right there. On the left image, you can see where the existing water control structure is in the dam, and you can see the star where the new water control structure is going to go. To construct the new water control structure while the reservoir is still operating, the first thing we had to build was a cofferdam out into the reservoir where we did this construction. The cofferdam was built to the same strength and elevation as the embankment itself. We tore out the dam in that area, built a new water control structure, rebuilt the dam over the new water control structure, and we're in the process right now of tearing out the old water control structure and removing the cofferdam. You can see the new water control structure at ASCE under construction at this time, where we have the hole cut in ASCE dam, and we're installing the conduits on the left, and then you see concrete going in over time on the right. And here you can see at Barker, the cofferdam's in place, getting ready for the construction on the left, and the construction of the new outlet works on the right. Then in February of this year, actually on Valentine's Day, February 14th, we released water from the new Barker water control structure for the very first time. And you're seeing there images from left to right of the water beginning to spill from the water control structure on down the channel into Buffalo Bayou. In March, we began releases from the ASCE reservoir, the new water control structure construction at ASCE Reservoir. And work continues on wrapping those projects up. Where are we moving to in the future with ASCE and Barker Reservoir? For years, we've been asking for study money. We, the Galveston District, and the project's been asking for study money for what's called a 216 study. A 216 study generally looks at a project when there has been significant changes over time to the area around the project and the operations of a project. We have seen that at ASCE and Barker. In addition to that, we needed to do the second part of the dam safety study on the emergency spillways. So with Tax Day and with Harvey, it was realized the importance of this, and a study was put together called the Buffalo Bayou and Tributary Resiliency Study. It looks at Buffalo Bayou, ASCE Reservoir, Barker Reservoir, the impact that Cypress Creek may have on those reservoirs, and the impact that we may have on Brays Bayou downstream of the project. And we're looking at ways to improve our overall water management within that drainage system. And so we started this process, and this process that we're working through right now will look at these potential improvements that we may do through the project. Right now, we're putting together a tentatively selected plan where we will actually present our suggestions, our initial suggestions, to the public and to our headquarters for review. And then next summer, we'll submit a plan to headquarters for acceptance, where we can move on to the process of designing and construction projects that will alleviate some of our flooding issues within the watershed area. The resiliency study will look at quite a few areas, but we'll look at structural measures and non-structural measures. Basically, the structural measures are looking at conveyance and storage. Conveyance along Buffalo Bayou, conveyance in the reservoirs at streams that lead into the reservoirs, storage within the watershed at both ASCE and Barker, storage within the reservoirs themselves, and storage along Buffalo Bottom. And for non-structural means, we'll look at changing our management conceivably, buyouts, elevating buildings, signage, and additional flood warning systems that may be appropriate for the area. Now, just because we come up with these ideas does not mean that we'll see any of these items constructed next week, or even next year, or even 10 years from now. We will come up with these ideas. We must have partnership buy-in from the community. Congress must approve these projects, and Congress must fund these projects. So while we can have the best plan in the world, if we can't get money to design it, or if we cannot get money to construct it, then they're going to sit there on the shelf. And this is just looking at some of those conveyance measures that we may have, where we could do cutoffs in some oxbows, where we may do tunnels, and where we may enlarge the size of some of the channels to convey water faster. And storage, we're looking at storage downstream, additional storage in the reservoirs, and storage on the watersheds also, looking for other areas. Storage on the watershed is getting very difficult because the watersheds are developing very rapidly. Storage downstream is difficult also because of the lack of public ownership of land. And the last thing that we want to do, Harris County Flood Control wants to do, is use eminent domain to acquire land. Hopefully, if we end up with projects where we're looking at storage or conveyance issues, we're hoping we get willing sellers that will make this process a much easier and palatable process. And looking at the dam safety project phase 2 of that's being rolled up into the Buffalo Bayou Tributary Resiliency Study, you can see in that middle photo the end of the dam, the north end of ASCE Dam, with water all the way around it. We actually had water running around the end of the dam. Water never did run over the auxiliary spillways, however. But we are looking at what would happen if water did run over those spillways, the impact to the community downstream, upstream, because it's going to mean a larger pool, and whether the emergency spillways would hold up under that much water and that flow going over them. We are going to be doing a repair job on those auxiliary spillways in the very near future, later this year, to beef them up and see if we can get them to last a few more years while we're continuing to do this dam safety phase 2 study. That about wraps up my presentation, but what I would like to go ahead and address is the recreational opportunities at Addison-Barker also. While when the Corps of Engineers is given a project to construct, and many of these projects are multi-purpose, meaning flood risk management, hydropower, navigation, and recreation, they have to be authorized as such. When Addison-Barker reservoirs were authorized, they were only authorized for flood risk management. But we own 26,000 acres in Harris, Fort Bend, and the city of Houston. So it would be a shame for that land to sit there and not be used except for flood storage in those times where it's not being used for flood storage. So we could, and we did, lease much of our lands out to Harris County, Fort Bend, and the city of Houston for parks. So George Bush Park and Barker Reservoir, Bear Creek Park and Addicks Reservoir are operated by Harris County. Cullen Park and Addicks Reservoir is operated by the city of Houston, and Cinco Ranch Park is operated by Fort Bend County. And we're glad to be partners with those government entities so that we can provide good quality recreation to the city of Houston and the communities surrounding it. And Julia, that wraps up my presentation, and I am ready to take any questions y'all may want to ask.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. On behalf of the ASCE Houston branch, we thank you for being our keynote speaker for our May branch meeting. And a beautiful ASCE tumbler will be mailed to you to show our appreciation for you volunteering your time. Before we get to the you're welcome. Before we get to the the question and answer session, I just wanted to run just a quick poll with the audience. Okay. And have a question here, if you guys wouldn't mind answering. Are you a member of the ASCE Houston branch? And I'll run this poll here for probably about a minute or two. And also to the audience, if you have questions, just please go ahead and put that in the question window in your GoToWebinar view box, and I'll get to them shortly. I'm going to close that poll. And I'm going to launch another question. For the first poll question that I showed on the screen, we had approximately, I would say 66% of the attendees who said that they were ASCE members. And the maximum amount of individuals that are participating on our webinar was roughly up to 250 individuals. So that I just wanted to mention that to everyone. And the second poll question, have you attended an event before hosted by the branch? And I'll let this go for about another minute, and then we will go into the session for asking questions to our keynote speaker. Okay, I'm closing the poll. So for the last poll question, we had, hello, we had 84, hello, we had 84 attendees said that they've actually attended an event that was hosted by the branch before. So at this time, I'm going to take a look at the questions that are in the window here. And so one question that I have, I believe it's from Taylor. The question, Richard, is, as a subcontractor, Epoxy Design Systems was pleased to have successfully completed the conduit grouting and steel plate replacement. Well, it says we will look forward to participation of spillway repairs. I think that was more of a comment there. Just waiting for more individuals to type in their questions. I'll see if there was any in the chat. I don't see any at this time. We have a couple more minutes, so please just go ahead and type your questions, and you could send it to the organizer, and I will be able to view them and read them to Richard.
I brought Skylar in, my 5-year-old granddaughter, or almost 5-year-old, to give me support during this session here.
No
Can you say
problem.
hi?
Hi, Skylar. You want to say hi? Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Are we
Thank
being
you.
shy? We're being shy.
That's okay.
She has to the stage from Okinawa.
That's nice. Nice. Did you like it? Good. Okay. Yeah, we have a couple more minutes before I wrap up. I wanted to give the audience a little bit more time if they wanted to, if they have any questions. Let me see here.
I bored everybody to death, or I answered everything they had, or the other.
Okay. Well, I don't see the questions coming in. I just saw one. I'm going to try something a little bit different. Okay. See if I can find any more questions. Let me see. Okay, I think I see some questions here. I needed to scroll up. So there we go. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. So I'm gonna have to go through these here. Okay, that's not a question. All right. Just 1 minute. Okay, so one question is from, I think it's from Jorge Alba. He says, are there any plans to mitigate the impact on the homes in the, I think he says, old area of the reservoir? So are there any plans to mitigate the impact on the homes in the old area of the reservoir? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. I can't hear you. Just 1 moment till the speaker gets his audio back. Now we can hear you. There we are. You're back.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. Okay, the question.
That's okay. You want me to repeat it again?
No, the question was dealing with the homes upstream of Addicks and Barker reservoirs, I believe. Correct?
I'm assuming so. I'm assuming so. He says the old area of the reservoir. So yes.
Okay. Part of this issue will be determined by the court case that's going on right now and the litigation we have going on with our upstream trial. In addition, we are looking at the potential for buyouts as a result of the Buffalo Bayou and tributary flood control study. So both those arenas may result in some buyout opportunities for those homeowners up there. But there's nothing been decided yet at this time.
Okay. One other question was, let me see here. It says, any discussion or plans for shared use public transportation drainage tunneling that you could speak of?
Tunneling is an opportunity that we're looking at as part of the resiliency study. As far as shared use, I have not seen any discussion on that yet. Tunneling, as we know, will be a very expensive endeavor if we decide to go with that. The technology is there, but we do have unique challenges here versus other areas. With some of those challenges are right away, the lack of a hard substrate below the ground that we can tunnel in easily. So, but it is being looked at.
Okay. The next question is, are there available tours of the facility?
Could you repeat that, please?
Are there available tours of the facility?
If an organization would like a tour of the facility and this briefing or a similar briefing, we are more than willing to do that. As far as just one-on-one tour, the construction sites are off limits at this time, but we allow the public on the dam, and once the construction is over with, the public will be able to walk on the dam in the vicinity of the new water control structures. So viewing them by the public is there. And again, if there's an organization that would like a briefing on the project or a tour of the project, that can be arranged.
Okay. We'll definitely we'll get with you on that one. Probably ASCE may want to do something. Another question is, as the development of alternatives go on for the resiliency study, is climate change going to be accounted for in some way?
In almost everything we do today, and that's just not the Corps of Engineers, but that's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, many other organizations, we are required to take climate change into the study impact, and it will be addressed in our study.
Okay. Another question came in. It says, can you talk about any potential dredging that the U.S. Army Corps is looking to do in Barker and Addicks?
Okay, the term dredging is usually used for our navigation projects, but so I'm going to use the term excavation of the reservoir area. That is another alternative we're looking at in the study right now, would be to deepen the reservoir. We are limited on what we can do there because of the depth of the surrounding waterways that we would drain into. So while some people say let's deepen the reservoirs by 20 feet, then we would just have holes in the ground that would fill up with water. And so that does not increase additional storage unless we had pumpage. And of course, pumpage is extremely expensive, especially on a scale that we're talking about here. So excavation is a potential in the study that we're looking at. Excavation is being looked at by other agencies that are located in and around the projects also. So it may be something that you see in the not too distant future.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Another question came and it says, does the U.S. Army Corps have updated recommendations for design storms for engineers since there have been increased intensity storms observed due to climate change?
We use the information provided by our sister agencies, the National Weather Service and U.S. Geological Survey. And so, as we know, they're looking at new storm data all the time. And I believe, I'm drawing a mental blank right here, I believe it's called Atlas. Atlas what?
I think probably Atlas 14. Atlas 14.
Atlas 14. And we're looking at using that data as to the new norm for storms that can happen within the region. So we are taking that into account. That goes right along with climate change, and our recommendations and our calculations are going to be based on those newer, bigger storms that we're seeing occur within the region.
Okay. Another question, does the U.S. Army Corps anticipate any legislation changes to increase detention requirements with the new development?
Unfortunately, we have no control over those local regulations. Those regulations are established by City of Houston, Harris County, and Fort Bend County. Now, we can apply pressure to these other agencies by saying, we're not going to let y'all do that on our project if you don't require something of your developers. But the detention requirements that are part of development requirements around the projects and in the watersheds in the City of Houston, those are all local requirements. We do not have the authority to introduce or have any of those type of requirements.
Okay. Another question that came in, it says, does your team employ drones to monitor the reservoirs or watersheds either routinely or during flood events?
We're using drones a whole lot on our construction project. Our contractor is required to provide us with imagery on a routine basis of the construction. And we do have drones within our toolbox, not that we operate locally, but that we can bring in from some of our research stations across the United States. And as we see the need during our study or during a flood event, we can put those elements to use, and we have used them in the past.
Okay. One other question that came in, I'm just trying to maximize my screen here so I can see all the questions that are coming in. It says, for a land acquisition standpoint, has the U.S. Army Corps and flood control identified priority properties that they need to acquire, whether or not any new authorizations are approved?
You know, Harris County looks at it a little differently than we do. Harris County looks at the frequency of flooding that has occurred. And while you have some properties around Addicks and Barker that have flooded numerous times, with the exception of Harvey, those properties were flooded by inbound water or water trying to get into the reservoir, not water backed up behind the dam. Only on Harvey did we back water up off of government property into homes. So Harris County looks at those frequency of flooding that's occurring in some of these homes, and that's how they're determining their buyout. And we're looking at what our potential pool areas will be. And of course, we saw water leave that. So we're both looking at the potential for additional buyouts within the reservoir areas. And that investigation will overlap, and we will work together on those in some areas.
Okay. I believe that was, I'm still trying to look. I wanted to make sure I get everyone's questions. I do apologize if I do miss anyone's questions that's typed in here. I'll make sure that I get those to Richard such that he can answer them accordingly. At this time, we have probably, we're at our allotted time. And so I just want to wrap things up here and thank Richard once again for volunteering his service to be our keynote speaker for our May branch meeting. Our next branch meeting is going to be in June, it's scheduled for Tuesday, June 16th. It's still going to be another webinar with GoToWebinar. Our keynote speaker is Professor John Louis Briot. He is a distinguished professor at Texas A&M University, and he is also the president-elect of ASCE. You will receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar in about a day or two with instructions on how to obtain your PDH certificate, as well as viewing the recorded session of this webinar. At this time, if there are no further business, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Bye-bye, Richard.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.